Welcome to Fueling Conversations, a sport nutrition education network podcast with Dr. James Fleming. In today's episode, we're joined by Jade, a former judo athlete turned researcher, whose PhD focuses on disordered eating and body image issues in elite judo. Jade takes us inside the weight-cutting culture of judo, exploring how the pressures to make weight impact athletes both during their careers and long after retirement. She shares insights from her research and interviews with retired athletes, highlighting the long-term consequences of extreme weight management practices. We'll also discuss the lack of research on this topic in judo compared with other sports and the innovative ways Jade is raising awareness. She's developed an audio-visual resource built from real athlete experiences to help educate coaches, parents and athletes about the dangers of disordered eating and the need to prioritise long-term health over short-term competition goals. This is an eye-opening conversation about often overlooked issues in combat sports. Let's get into it. Hi Jade, thanks for joining us today. Excited to have you on here. So today, if you don't mind kind of introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and how you went from kind of being a judo athlete to then studying it in depth.
Yeah. So I've done judo since I was about 4 years old. I kind of stopped competing competitively, like properly when I went to university. I wasn't actually supposed to do sports coaching science when I went to uni. I applied to do history, took a year out, had a bit of a breakdown, decided to then embark on sports coaching. And then, it kind of just went from there. Then decided to do the MSc and applied sports psych. And then once that was done, I was like, I might as well or not might as well, but I decided to then do the PhD and here I am.
Cool. So I guess we're going to delve into your research space first, but it is around kind of judo. So I suppose first thing, if you can tell us kind of the title of your research, and then introduce to the audience what judo is, including myself, because I probably don't know the nuances behind it too.
Yeah, so my PhD thesis was on the disordered eating practices and body image concerns of elite and retired judo players. And for those that don't know, judo is a weight cutting sport. It's a combat sport. Athletes are put into weight categories. There's 7 weight categories for men, 7 weight categories for women in like the higher ends, like senior judo. And it's very common practice within judo for athletes to try and get their weight down to compete in a lighter weight category to achieve that supposed advantage over the lighter opponents.
Cool. And then in terms of how this inquiry came around, so without being too modest, your background in judo. So where did you get to? Was this something that was always in the back of your mind, or does it come to you when the PhD topic was the topic proposed to you by researchers as well, or how did that come around?
No, so it's a topic that's quite close to my heart. I mean, I never really had to cut weight too much, well, at all really. I just kind of competed wherever I naturally sat in. And I did my undergraduate and master's research within the same topic as well. So it's kind of just like extending that research. And as I said, it's a topic really close to my heart, like witnessing other people cutting weight, the things that they go through, like people that I know develops like eating disorders and stuff like that. So it's a very big topic to study. And it was one that I kind of came up with myself, I guess.
And I guess tell me if I'm wrong, but when you're in cultures, and then we can see it in other sporting cultures too, it's kind of almost anecdotally always seen and known, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of research to kind of support it or to give people kind of those objective tools to battle it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, coming from a very minority sport anyway, I think shedding light on these things was really important to me. I mean, you look at the research, and the only really, I guess, weight categorized or combat sport that is often researched is wrestling, especially like in the NCAA. Whereas all other research really tends to be done in gymnastics, swimming, those kind of sports that are more like aesthetic and lean, and it'd be almost more obvious that these kind of things would be happening.
So then, how did you choose, or how did the topic kind of evolve? So if we can start delving into the first part of the PhD, or the first kind of level of inquiry for the PhD, and then we'll go into more of the applied bits.
Yeah, so my first study for my PhD, I did an ethnography on in an elite judo club where they have full-time athletes there, and I don't know really where that that came from. I guess I always knew that I wanted to research judo and research the athletes in judo, and it was just kind of, well, where would these practices most likely be happening? And that is in an elite environment where they're all living, they're all training together. Yeah, that kind of setting. And then onto the retired athletes, I haven't competed for a very long time, and even though I never really cut weight or had to really monitor it, it was something that I was always very aware of. Like, I would never eat breakfast before a judo competition the morning if I had a morning weigh-in. So like sometimes you'd have to weigh in at like 11, 12 o'clock, and I wouldn't eat breakfast. And
How
even
old are
really,
you?
well, I started judo when I was 4, but it was never that stage when I was 4. You don't start competing
Yeah, yeah, of course.
until you're 8 anyway. But it was probably not until like my teen years. But I mean, I was still very aware of the fact that, oh, I have to weigh in. You buy the lightest pair of judo trousers that you could possibly find to step on the scales in, a really thin t-shirt as well. So it was always something it's just there. And I guess to me, it's very normal, because I was almost brought up in that culture, and seeing it on a daily basis as well. So yeah, to me it was just very normal, and I guess I just wanted to understand why it's normal and why it's not really questioned more.
And I guess like when like 10 years ago, whenever that may have been when you were a teenager, um, the sort of eating the sort of space is probably even less known or less kind of hot on the in the media kind of space. It's probably more lent down to that kind of clinical CAMS based kind of referral space. Whereas it feels like the last 5 years with low energy availability, red S, those kind of topic areas in particularly in sports nutrition are being widely researched and widely discussed. That maybe it might be more um, it's obviously an important time, but it might be a more kind of prevalent issue, I suppose, or something that kind of needs a bit more support for those coaches that may or may not have had any idea about this beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. And like, yeah, I was never really like that into, I guess, following what, the squad wanted us to do in terms of like that they recommended like how we should, not how we should eat, but nutrition and stuff like that. I was never really, I mean, I still know nothing about nutrition to this day. I still don't eat breakfast, and you're gonna shake your head at me for that. But like, yeah, there has definitely been like a massive, focus on it recently. I mean, you look at the documentaries that have been on the BBC recently, like the Freddie Flintoff one. He doesn't even come from a weight cutting sport. He comes from cricket. And the athlete one, I can't remember the other athletics one that it was, but quite recently that those came out, I think.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of so that kind of first study findings, what did that lead to? What were the key kind of take homes from that first bit?
Yeah, so the first study, it was kind of a bit obvious, but cutting weight is really heavily embedded within the sport. And rather than kind of disordered eating and weight cutting being seen as separate, I kind of then realized that the practices are synonymous with each other. So, skipping breakfast or eating less than you should or exercising excessively or, wearing a sweatsuit under your judo gi when you're training or using the sauna excessively, they're all disordered eating practices, but they're also cutting weight methods. So they were kind of like seen as the same thing. And the extreme practices that some athletes will go through to lose and 10 kilos sometimes to drop down to the next weight category. Yeah, and then that led on to my second study, which was on retired athletes, which I think I almost wanted to do for myself in a weird way, because I don't really train judo anymore. I don't compete in it. I haven't competed in it since 2018, I don't think. And it was very therapeutic, I think, that research, and looking back on it was really helpful to me to know that fine, I wasn't an elite athlete. Like, I never went to the Olympics, never went to the Commonwealth. So I competed internationally a few times. But it was really good to know that even though I hadn't competed to the extent that some of my participants had, they kind of like felt the same way about cutting weight and about their weight when they first came out of the sport.
So can you delve into that a little bit more? So what was that second study investigating, and what were some of the key findings?
Yeah, so it looked at the impacts that cutting weight had on during an athlete's competitive career on then their retired lives. And I didn't have a cap on how long they could be retired for. Like I had someone that had been retired for like 6 months to a year, and others that have been retired for over 20 years. And it was nice to kind of see that like progression from almost, oh, I'm really not satisfied with my body. I've put on weight. I'm not training. I'm eating more than I used to. I'm eating the same amount, but I'm not doing anything to lose the weight. Um, and that kind of internal struggle that they had with themselves, to then kind of learn from it, develop. And some of them, one participant I had that retired the longest ago, she doesn't have an issue with her weight anymore. She weighs the same as she always has done. It's not really an issue to her anymore, but maybe someone that retired like 10, 15 years ago still kind of has those thoughts, refuses to step on the scales,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of things. And also there was one really key finding from both my first study and my second study, which was that judo players kind of have this like weight category identity where they don't want to change their weight category because they feel like that's the best chance they have at winning. But then when they go to retire, they still see that weight category as a target. So like I used to fight in the under 57 kilo category. If I stepped on the scales and saw like 61 kilos, for example, I'd be like, oh my goodness, like that's just so heavy. Whereas if I were to see like 57, 58, I'd be like, oh, that's fine. And sometimes like I do step on the scales at work and I'm like 59 kilos and I'm quite okay with that. Like that's for me. I mean, it's quite light still, but like for me, I think, that's relatively good weight to be. And it's always like in the back of my mind, which is, yeah, kind of what I
Interesting.
found with the others as well.
So then how did you get down the avenue of disordered eating, eating disorders? Because I guess like yes, prevalence of being weight conscious, overtraining, maybe being controlling of a diet is quite normal in an athlete population. You know, we're trying to train people to be robots in the elite space almost, you know, come along,
Mm.
do this, consistently do this. And actually that can easily spill over into our controlling dietary intake. So how did that inquiry come around and did any of your studies go into that a little bit more?
I don't really know. I guess I was always quite interested in the topic just as itself. Um, and then doing judo alongside it, it was kind of that I saw that within judo that, and then, you learn about it in sports psychology and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, well, these practices are actually very, very similar. And I guess that's how it kind of came up. And then, reading previous research papers as well, and kind of seeing that, it's not just judo that has these problems, especially if it's a weight cutting sport, weight categorized sport. It's like I said earlier, it's like gymnastics where, they're it's very much on their looks and how their body looks. Whereas judo, you're wearing a massive, great big gi that looks like a set of pajamas. Like it's not exactly like body image conscious, is it? But I mean, I guess if you're in an athletic space, you're expected to look good,
Mm,
regardless of whether you fight in the over 100 kilos or in the under 60 kilo category.
interesting. And so I guess for the audience listening, can you kind of establish some of those symptoms or what disordered eating is and what eating disorders are? Because I think they're quite important nuances there.
Yeah. So disordered eating is subclinical compared to an eating disorder. So eating disorders has to be classified, well, it's clinically diagnosed, whereas disordered eating isn't. And there kind of is, it sits on like a spectrum. So you have like pathological, which is your eating disorders, and then non-pathological, which is just, normal eating, maybe watching your weight a little bit, sometimes like people tend to do. And disordered eating some kind of comes in the middle. And I think for me, what was really interesting with my research was that when athletes were cutting weight, they were constantly obsessed with their food, constantly obsessed with their weight. And that's more leading towards like the eating disorder end of the spectrum. Whereas then when they weren't necessarily cutting weight, they were fine, quite conscious of what they were eating because they didn't want to deviate too much from what they, have to be for their weight category. But it then kind of goes to the less kind of pathological side of the spectrum. So you can kind of see it going to and from in that kind of research. But yeah, eating disorders is kind of being obsessed with your weight all the time, how you look all the time, engaging in really extreme practices like binging and then being sick, or using laxatives like more often in a week than disordered eating would be. So that's kind of why cutting weight, I guess, is more the disordered eating side of it, because it's not constant.
Yes, that's an interesting one because with the research in nutrition anyway, there's definitely a big pull to have not the extreme kind of go from 10 kilos down and making sure
Mm.
we're not too far away from our natural weight. I know that that might not be the same in practice all the time, but I guess did you see that too? Those that were cutting more had those more obviously had to then adopt more extreme, more disordered eating disorder based patterns or
Yeah, and I guess some people would do it in quite a quick way so that they didn't feel as rubbish for as long,
yeah.
whereas others would kind of do it maybe over like a month, 6 week kind of weight cut so that it was more gradual and probably a bit healthier that way. Whereas some people would probably do it in like 3 weeks. And so then their idea is I won't feel as rubbish for as long. So it's kind of
It's
that.
interesting. We'll try and come into the why, and I don't think we're going to be able to solve this major
Yeah.
kind of concern, I guess, across many sports and many cultures. But can you go into the next part? So we've identified that yeah, there's retired judo players have some weight-based issues and still have long-term effects of this, and you've established there's a high prevalence of poor cutting strategies that may lead to an eating disorder eating. What was the next thing you did?
Yeah, so my next study, well, for a bit of context, actually, for my second study, part of the research, I asked the retired athletes to write a letter to their younger self, where they kind of delved into the things that they had done and, kind of like reflecting and looking back, which was actually really nice. And I think my participants enjoyed it. And then I think it was 15 participants, of the 15 letters that I got back, I then put them all into one combined composite letter. So I took the best bits from each, and kind of tried to create one character out of all of the 15 participants that I had. Um, and then from that composite letter, I then decided to create a resource. So I created a video and audio resource, just because in judo, well, you might not know this or you might know this, the Paralympic athletes, they're blind, so they can't have any kind of, it's not like they've lost a limb or something, it's their blindness. So that's why we did the audio one as well, so that they could interact with it as well as the visual one, obviously. And yeah, so I created this resource. It took me a little while, but once it was done, it was good and it was there. And then I disseminated that resource to what we called potential users. So they were athletes, coaches, practitioners, so like nutritionists, psychologists, like any sports science practitioners, I guess, and then parents as well, and kind of assess the impact of it using a survey, just to see kind of what people thought of it and where they think it would best be disseminated to in the future.
Can you talk us through a little bit about what that content kind of included? I don't know if we're able to share it or not, if it's available at the moment. If we are, then we can. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that content, what the aim of that was? Because it's really nice and refreshing to hear, high level academic studies being disseminated to the roots of where they want to be, because often that can be a missed part of the puzzle, in academic work.
Yeah, so I actually took part in actually, I was the athlete being filmed in the video. So it was me in the video, and we kind of tried. At first, it was very much trial and error because I'd obviously never done anything like that before. So I worked with a videographer who I know through work anyway, and he was really great because he made sure that I had all the content that I needed and filmed more than enough, essentially. And at first, we just filmed kind of general judo footage, which didn't really convey the message. So then we kind of went down the more specific route, and we had a look at the letter that was being read, which I read alongside my boyfriend as well. So he had like the male and the female voice to really pinpoint that it's not just a female problem or it's not just a male problem, it's across both genders in the sport. And we kind of went down the very like specific route of what do we need to film to make it really like stand out and really like send the message home. So we filmed me like running on the treadmill with my what did I have on? I had like my judo kit on and a hoodie on. And then I also had a raincoat on over the top of it to kind of like almost mimic what a sweatsuit would look like.
No.
Like me going into the sauna, um, training with, with layers on, all those kind of things. And kind of, I also wanted to try and convey not the just the behavioral side of it, but also like how athletes feel. And it's almost hard to do that. Like, I'm not an actress, but it's hard to do that. So he filmed me like walking down the street looking really miserable and things like that. So I kind of wanted, and also there's another bit where in the letter they spoke about kind of feeling very isolated during the cutting weight process. And so there was a bit where he filmed me like within a group of people, but just not engaging with them whatsoever. So we kind of really wanted to convey that kind of the behavioral side of it. So what athletes actually do to cut weight, but also how it makes them feel inside and in terms of
Yeah.
like feeling isolated and all those kind of things.
It's a super powerful video, and one that, yeah, I mean, I know you spoke to other people, and it's about getting those out. Mass is going to be really powerful. How has it been received in your area? So it must be quite tricky, right? So tell me if I'm wrong. You're still a coach,
Yeah.
um, and you're essentially going to turn up, and you're in some ways could be seen as going into a place and going, well, look what you're doing to people. If people misread the way you're going about it, so if you send this really hard hitting video in to to parents or young people,
Mm.
how's that gone about? Have you had any challenging conversations, or has it all been received with, the right way? How have you done that?
Yeah, it was actually received really well, which was really reassuring. I managed to get 37 responses, I think, on my survey, a mixture of, parents, athletes, coaches, practitioners, and the parents received it really well. A lot of the parents were saying, governing bodies need to do more. This is a really prominent issue, and a lot of the parents had kids that were currently within judo. So that was really good. So it wasn't just parents of retired athletes, but it was parents of current athletes who are currently competing in the sport and maybe kind of battling with, do I need to lose weight? Should I do it? Maybe on the cusp of being like, well, I'm 2 kilos over. Do I bother losing those 2 kilos, or do I just go up into the next weight category? I had some coaches do it, and they thought, again, it needs to be put out into the public domain. Everyone needs to see this as like, you know, people need to be educated on this, because it's not just that, you become an elite athlete and then they go, oh, I need to start cutting weight. It's very much like, I think there's some previous research that's found that children will start cutting weight or trying to lose weight from such a young age, and then trying to maintain that weight for like 2 years or more. So from, I don't know what age really, from the age of whatever, but maybe from like early teens, 12, 13, 14, where it's really starting to matter, because they might be, squad selection is coming up. You need to be in a certain weight category. You need to win this gold medal to be selected for the squad, those kind of things. So I think there are those pressures as well from above almost, which I guess is the case in any sport really. And then I did have a few athletes do it, watch the video and do the survey. And it was also received really well by them, and them saying that it's actually really nice for how they're feeling to be put into a resource, and almost you're not alone because everyone else is feeling like this too. So in that way, I think it was quite therapeutic for those athletes that watched it.
Yeah, I think, like you say, you're not going as a solo warrior to try and change, remove weight cutting, to change, get rid of all these sports that have these kind of perhaps higher prevalence. So I think it is just trying to get that message out, and the clarity that then can maybe nudge that kind of education piece and just the conversation. And it's so good to hear that it's been well received, because, I've been in conferences before where we've been talking about body composition, for example, and people have been saying how we need to be careful with just overdoing body composition for the sake of it, and then coaches have got really, really irate about it, seeing it as that we're blaming coaches for everything, when it's a tricky space, isn't it? So
Yeah.
in terms of next steps, I guess, and applications, what would you say are, the key bits, the key findings, key aspects of the PhD, and
Mhm.
how do you plan to get the message out further, and what are the next steps? I'm not going to say postdoc because I know you're just about submitted. So, and by the time this comes out, I'm sure you'll be a doctor. But the yeah, what is the thought process here?
Yeah, well, you say postdoc, but I have,
Oh,
on my job hunt, I've been looking at all avenues, but I think my mum would probably shoot me if I decided to do that. She's like, no more education, Jade. um, but yeah, so I guess the key takeaways from the study were definitely the weight category identity that I spoke about earlier, where it transfers from elite, competitive sport into the retired side of things. I think that's really important because I guess when you're in the sport, you don't actually realize what you're doing and what you're being told to do. Maybe you're being told to do it, then impact you into retirement. At that time, you're an elite athlete. You want to win. You want to succeed. You want to go to the Commonwealths. You want to go to the Olympics. You want to be the best. And I guess how it's going to impact you in the future isn't really on their mind at that point, because why would it be?
mhm.
um and yeah, I guess in terms of the video, I would love it to be used within. I That wasn't actually an aim of my PhD either. I never ever set out to create an educational resource or create an education program. It just kind of happened because I thought, well, if these practices are happening in elite athletes, and if they're then happening still when you reach retirement and when you're going into becoming a retired athlete, surely then the onset of it has got to be way before that. And athletes, I think, need to be educated that, fine, monitor your weight, see if you have to lose 500 grams to get into a category that just involves going to the toilet before you weigh in. Like, it's not that, well, it's not that much of a big deal. I shouldn't say that, but but yeah, I guess then when it comes to the more extreme ends of 3 kilos, 4 kilos, 5 kilos, 6 kilos upwards, that's when I think you have to really take a step back and think, is this really good for my performance, or am I just losing this weight because I think this weight category is the best for me? Maybe take a look back and think, I haven't won a medal in 6 months, haven't won a medal in a year. Why am I still losing weight to get into this weight category that might not be the best for me? But then I think, like I said, there is the pressure from getting selected for tournaments and being on a ranking list, because then once you move to a different weight category, your ranking points don't transfer on to the next weight category. They're gone. You're at the bottom of the list. And so then in terms of like Olympic cycles, because they're every 4 years, like, once you're on the ranking list for, let's say, under 57s, if you then decide to move to under 63 kilos, you got to start again. And I think that's a real big thing for athletes,
Yeah, interesting you
starting
said that.
again.
Obviously, I'm not from a judo space at all, but when I used to work in higher education, we had one guy, small, 50, he was 16 because he was at college, and he was in the GB pathway. And I remember him saying to me, he said, James, if I don't stay in my weight, I know that I'm
Mm,
top 8 and I need to be top 3 to keep my funding. And I can't compete in Europe if I don't get funding because I don't have the money from his single parent home, and it costs a lot of money, right? So that was my first inclination. That was before I did any MSc studies myself into this whole like pressured world of potentially changing behaviors that could be long lasting. And that's
mm,
why it's really interesting from my standpoint, having a keen interest in adolescent space, is that first 2 decades of anyone's life is really at such a key stage to have a relationship with body image as well as food and dietary intake, and then changing that behavior is so complex and long and so difficult to do that it's interesting that your research kind of touches on that too. I wonder, I guess, how does it get tackled? Like, is there anything like how maybe not get tackled because it's such a loaded question, but from a coach his head on that you've got on now,
yeah.
has there been anything or any changes in your club where you think, okay, we need to be aware of signs and symptoms, or what are our metrics we're looking at from a performance perspective, or is there anything that's changed just in your practice, or is there anything that you've kind of alluded to in your readings that might be good for those people that are out in spaces and go, well, hang on, I don't want to be in a position where I'm, potentially having a part to play in or contributing factor of. Yeah, anything you can share on that?
Yeah, so in my research, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but in like 1998, the wrestling in the US brought in these new weight cutting category rules, which are really extensive, and they're actually, I think they actually did help in limit the amount that people were weight cutting. And it came off the back of a couple of wrestlers actually dying from extreme weight cutting practices. And you compare kind of their regulations with the regulations of judo, for example, and it's not as extensive within judo. And I think if and that was actually one of my practical implications from my research is maybe the rules within judo need to be changed around weight cutting for those at a young age, because at the moment I think like cadet level, which is, I can't even remember what age that is off the top of my head, so apologies. But they I think it's kind of like middle teen, late teeny kind of age. It's if you get caught weight cutting, you'll be asked to weigh in straight away. And I think that's like I don't think that's necessarily strong enough to put people off of doing it. I think there needs to be more, and I can't exactly remember now what's in this wrestling thing for cutting weight. And I think it gets updated yearly with the rules that come out and stuff. But that was really interesting because off the back of athletes dying, they did something about it. And then in terms of like my own coaching practice, like I mean, I coach 4-year-olds. I don't think they're bothered about what they look like or anything like that. So for me, it's nothing's really changed. And also the club that I teach, and it's not particularly competitive. It's a bit more recreational. But you know, we do have athletes there. It's not just a judo club either. It's a martial arts club. So, you know, we do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, we do kickboxing, mixed martial arts, all sorts of things. And we have scales in the club, but you know, you go to the gym and there's scales in the gym, so it doesn't really make a difference. But yeah, I hear those that are like going into like amateur MMA fights and stuff like that, talking about how much weight they're losing, and I just sit there and I'm just like, you really don't realize what you're doing to your body and what you're doing to your mental health and things like that. But then when you retire, how's this going to affect you? And like I said, people don't think about it because it's in the moment. They're doing what they want to do for now. They're not thinking about what's going to happen in 10 years' time.
And that's where I really like, and again, I commended you already. I think that although you stumbled across a video and that now being part of your PhD and your research, that those sorts of things are really powerful. I know, obviously, we know Freya, who's also doing some storytelling things, and essentially this is another PhD student who's telling stories around narrative feedback from athletes who have struggled with eating disorders, those sorts of things, and that's,
yeah, with combined with injury as well, I think.
yeah, and it's kind of how can we tell the story in an effective way that can be hit by masses outside of these academic space in isolation. I think, yeah, really applaud you for doing that, and hopefully that it can have traction across the whole kind of space, like you say, not just isolated to judo, because yeah, really good. I suppose to finish up. And for the listeners that are interested, I'll share your details, and maybe you can point them in the right direction of kind of where they might be able to find some of your research or some of your insights. I'm sure you've done like infographics and those sorts of things for them as well. And we'll share that on the little blurby bit. I always like to finish off with like a something challenging slash silly. And they used to do, and they still do in some academic institutions, a 3-minute thesis. And I thought, well, 3 minutes is a bit too easy. So if I asked you, and I was saying, okay, I've got my 2 daughters, they're going to turn up to your club, and they want to do judo. For the first time, what would you tell me as a parent about your research if you had 30 seconds to do so?
Um, about my research, I guess, don't, you know, if your daughters do want to then go and do judo internationally and, you know, be on the squad and stuff like that. I mean, let's assume that they're only very little at the moment, so it's probably nothing
they're going to be well
that's on your
classed.
mind. But you know, I think just kind of grow and develop. This is what actually was in my letter. One of the things that was in my letter. So, you know, just grow and develop in the weight category that you're in. Don't put too much pressure on necessarily, you know, trying to attain unattainable weight for yourself. And have fun whilst doing it. Like judo brings you so many opportunities. Like a lot of athletes, they travel the world to go to all of these really cool places, and then they don't ever actually really see these cool places because they're in a hotel room trying to cut weight. So I guess, grow and develop in the weight category that you're in, and just have a really, really great time doing it, I guess. And
I love that.
yeah.
I think it's powerful because that's just a message behind sport, right? I know pressures can come in. I don't know as well as you do in terms of, when you get to a higher level, there's probably more pressure and then we can lose the love. But ultimately, like, can we keep the context real that it's a sport and that's what it is. And it's
Mm.
probably going to be better if you can. The closer you can keep to those kind of early stage, I do this because I love it. It's probably better from a whole kind of holistic as well as well-being and physical kind of development space too. I wonder, whilst we finish up, whether you'd be happy to share the letter or a letter, and I could then post this on the video and the link so that we can have the audience can kind of read it in their own time. Is that something that's possible?
Yeah, I can send you the document of the composite letter that I
Yeah,
created in my second study that was then used for my third study. So then people
yeah.
can have a rough idea of what was in it. I can,
I
yeah,
think
that's
it's
fine.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jade, thanks for giving us this kind of in focus around this really interesting topic area, and it crosses over. I know we are honing in on judo, but I know the audience can definitely relate to this across many sports and many different facets of life as well. So, yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks.